The Yukon, the land of legendary big game, sprawling vast wilderness, and one of the best places on Earth to experience the auroras. A trip out to the Yukon bush is a trip to find out exactly what you're made of. And that's what you're planning, but you have nothing to worry about. You've done trips like this before all over the Yukon, and you have unparalleled levels of experience dealing with the wildlife, including an academic background in biology. You've done endless research and studies on grizzly bears, you can read them, you understand their behavior, and on top of that, you're a highly skilled bow hunter. You've been a hunting guide for ages, and people come to you to help gain knowledge and experience. People come to you to take them out into the woods, and they put their lives in your hands. Everyone knows you as the guy when it comes to hunting and recreating in the Yukon wilderness. You're a modern-day Daniel Boone, and you've earned it. In fact, it's extremely difficult to imagine someone with more experience than you. The time comes to depart on your latest adventure. You board the float plane with all your supplies, 2 weeks of supplies to be precise. 2 weeks sounds like a long time to most people, but for you, this is just another hunting trip into the bush. This is totally in your comfort zone. You fly over the vast expanse of rugged wilderness, and in doing so, you take in all of the amazing visuals that you pass over. You observe the waterways and trails, you observe the mountains, and of course, the weather. You keep a keen eye out for wildlife that may be spotted from the sky. You're extremely observant, and not much gets past you these days. Eventually you make it to the lake on which you're supposed to land on, and you're dropped off along with all of your provisions and even a small boat to the camp area on shore, at which you are to spend your next 14 days. You get straight to work setting up your new temporary home. You set up your tent, a kitchen area a safe distance away, and a place to store your food supplies. This is dangerous bear country, and there's no room for mistakes. Being lazy with food storage in this area can mean serious trouble with the bears. The North is unforgiving in that sense. So many people before you have had the serious misfortune of being eaten alive by such animals, completely ripped to shreds. While sitting at camp after dinner, you decide to just hang out and take in all of the breathtaking scenery, listening to the small waves crash in onto the lakeshore. This is living, you think to yourself. It's in that very moment when something catches your eye, something in the distance down the lakeshore. A moose. Exactly what you've come here to hunt. You're 99% sure you saw the back end of a moose walk into the brushy foliage at the edge of the water. You determine the quickest way to get to it, and also the quietest way is by boat. You waste no time grabbing your custom homemade bow and some arrows. You can't believe it. The first day here and you spot the exact animal you were hoping to hunt? Life couldn't be any better. You paddle quickly but quietly to where you believe you saw the moose. You grab your bow and carefully exit the boat, moving quietly through the brush further away from the shore until you find a nice, ideal spot to sit and wait. Little do you know that you're living the last few minutes of your life. Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the mystery of BART SCHLEYER. BART was an expert hunter. He was a scientist, essentially. He had a background in wildlife biology. He had a master's degree. The guy was basically a legend when it comes to researching bears, collaring them, studying them. He did the same kind of work with tigers in Russia. He did that work with Siberian tigers, which is absolutely outstanding. The guy loved animals. He was an expert outdoorsman. He knew everything there was to know about the areas that he visited, about hunting, about tracking, and about just existing in the outdoors as a solo guy. Like, this guy was pretty hardcore. He hunted with a handmade bow and handmade arrows, and he was just a legend in his community. BART went missing. He was dropped off by a float plane and was supposed to be picked up 2 weeks later, but when that float plane came back to pick him up, he wasn't at his camp. He was gone. And eventually what ended up happening is they found, part of his head. And that's pretty much it. The circumstances to which he was found don't add up. Most people say he was attacked by a grizzly bear. And that's that. It was just a case of being at the wrong place at the wrong time, similar to Timothy Treadwell, the guy that was featured in the Grizzly Man documentary, who was eaten by a grizzly bear, him along with his girlfriend. They think something similar to that happened. But when you hear the story, when you hear what happened, you'll know. You'll be like, maybe there's something more going on to this story more than just a bear attack. Maybe something else was going on. Maybe something that involved a creature that we know as Sasquatch or Bigfoot. But before we go any further onto this case, let's go over what actually happened. Let's get into an article here that I dug up online about the story of what happened to Bart SCHLEYER. The Puzzling Death of Bart SCHLEYER in the Yukon Territory of Canada, published October 27, 2017. Bart SCHLEYER was a famous outdoorsman, hunter, and survival expert. In September of 2004, Bart went off for a trip in the Canadian wilderness. His last contact was when a chartered float plane left him at the larger of the Reed Lakes in Canada's Yukon Territory on September 14th. Reed Lakes is on the southern slope of the Selwyn Mountains, about 175 miles north of the town of Whitehorse, and the nearest settlement is Stewart Crossing, about 15 miles from the lakes on the road from Whitehorse to Dawson. He was well equipped for the trip with 3 plastic Action Packer crates with enough food for at least 2 weeks, clothing, and camp gear such as a tent and an inflatable boat. When the plane that dropped Bart off returned 2 weeks later to collect him and take him back to civilization, the experienced woodsman was gone. The pilot thought this was strange, as he was no city slicker. He knew how to handle himself in even the most remote wilderness and could be described as a survival expert. Bart was reported missing on September 30th, 2004, and the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, launched a comprehensive search and found nothing. According to the RCMP, he had lunch or supper in a camp, since the remains of a meal were found. Bart had evidently used his boat and paddled it down the lake from camp, and it was found a half a mile from the camp. The Mounties thought there was a possibility SCHLEYER might have hiked out to the highway, and with deteriorating weather, they called it a day. Dib Williams, a friend of SCHLEYER's in Whitehorse, was dissatisfied with the RCMP efforts, and got pilot friend Wayne Curry to fly them to the camp after they had departed. They found Bart's tent had been knocked down, either by wind or by animals, but all the equipment was still there. They searched the area around the tent, and they found his backpack, bear spray, a knife, and a VHF radio. Williams and Curry got increasingly concerned, as they didn't buy the story that SCHLEYER had hiked out when he left such key equipment behind. On the second day of their search, they found his bow near the inflatable boat. About 60 yards back in the woods from the boat, the bow and arrows in a handmade buckskin quiver were leaned up against a tree next to a dry bag full of gear, on which he'd probably been sitting on, and this was located on flat ground next to a thicket of black spruce and willows. Curtis, an experienced moose hunter, said it looked like the sort of place an archer might set up if trying to call a moose into range. A little further on, they found a camouflage face mask with blood and hair on it, and at this point, they called the RCMP back to the area. On October 3rd, the Mounties, Yukon conservation officers, and civilian volunteers flew back to the area to begin a more detailed grid search. At first they found little but bear and wolf tracks, but then a baseball cap was spotted by the searchers, and then camouflage pants, a camera, part of a skull, and just a few small bones. All these items were 60 meters or so from the bow and the spruce tree. The teeth in the skull allowed the subsequent identification of the remains as being Bart SCHLEYER. There wasn't much more of his body found. Since there was quite a bit of grizzly scat in the area, it fueled speculation that SCHLEYER had been unexpectedly killed and eaten by a bear, as happened with the famous Timothy Treadwell, whose death was captured in a documentary by Werner Herzog in the 2006 film Grizzly Man. Amongst some of the bear scat samples, there were some bone fragments, but no fabric. In Treadwell's case, not only were human remains found in the contents of the bear's stomach, but also large amounts of their clothing. Most of SCHLEYER's clothes were never found, but searchers and friends were skeptical it was a bear attack that had taken Bart out. First, there was no sign of a death struggle, no vegetation or ground had been disturbed. The remains were found in a little patch of sparse spruce lying on the moss, and if a bear had killed them, this would be unusual, as they usually bury their kills in a sort of cache. The remains of Treadwell and his girlfriend were found in such a cache after they were killed, but there was no cache anywhere in the area that searchers could locate. The Vancouver pathologist who examined Schleier's remains found no tooth punctures in his skull, nor indications of scratch marks from teeth. When bears attack people, they almost always go for the head. Even if he started playing dead, which is a recommended tactic for surviving a grizzly bear attack, friends said he would have known that if the animal continued attacking, the only chance for survival would be to fight back, and generally speaking, a bear attack is prolonged and violent. A friend said, "I think the least likely scenario is some sort of surprise encounter, but it's hard for me to imagine having a bear sneak up on him and get him." Almost everyone who knew Schleyer believed he was simply too good of an outdoorsman, too alert while in the forest to have a bear catch him by surprise. Bart's hat, for example, was completely undamaged. If a bear had got him, it's even harder to imagine the animal killing him without leaving signs of a struggle on a site covered with soft, easily disturbed moss. An attack goes on for a long time. The audio tape of Timothy Treadwell's death goes on for many minutes, recording the sounds of him and his partner being eaten alive. The balaclava contained little blood and hair, and his pants even less. If a bear attacks a man, it won't remove his pants without them being shredded and soaked in blood. Normally bears grab the end, especially when attacking from behind, causing profuse bleeding, so why wasn't the balaclava blood-soaked? Others disagree and say that even for an experienced outdoorsman, a predatory bear could sneak up and deliver a fatal attack. The plastic container that held his food there hadn't even been disturbed, and bear experts said that if a grizzly had killed Schleyer, it is likely the same bear would have gone to the camp, given its proximity, and even eaten through the canned food. Everything points to the evidence being scavenging related, not caused by a violent direct attack. The circumstances of Bart's death are very strange, even if experts and searchers disagree with the cause. Bridget Parker, a spokeswoman for the Mounties and Whitehorse, said the case remains open, but the organization leans towards the idea that Schleyer was attacked and killed by a bear. Everything at the scene suggested a bear attack, and it did not suggest foul play. So it is very strange. Obviously, bear attacks happen all the time. They can happen when you least expect it. People can't, control nature. We like to think we can. We like to think we're the boss. But when we go out into the wilderness, things can happen that are completely out of our control. One of those things being a bear attack. And when you're up north, in the far north, in the Yukon and the Northwest Territories and into Alaska, the bears there are massive. They are hungry. And, there's lots of legends and stories of man-killer bears that just are angry and they will kill men and eat them. So this could be something like that, but this story does sound very strange. It was apparently featured in one of David Paulides' books, one of the Missing 411 books, just because the circumstances surrounding it are so odd and peculiar. Some of the strangest things are like the actual scene itself. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of any, fight. There wasn't any sign of disturbance in the soil and the ground or anything like that. And during the initial search, nothing was even found. The RCMP didn't really find anything, but Bart's friends, they weren't happy with that conclusion. So they went out and his buddy found, his balaclava and, some human remains, parts of his head. That is very strange. The other strange thing is that his food was still left there. Bears are extremely sensitive to smell. For sure they would have eaten that food. It appeared that Bart was only there for maybe a day or two. Just based on how much supplies were left in his camp, the tent was pushed over or had collapsed for some unknown reason. It's really hard to say what that was. Maybe, a creature, a Bigfoot-like creature came up to his tent and, attacked him or did something to cause Bart maybe to get in his boat and paddle down the shore. It's a theory, but it's also very possible that Bart was at his campsite and he saw something down the shore that looked maybe like an animal, like a moose or something along those lines, and he went to go investigate, and he had his bow with him, and that was that. He parked his boat, he got off into an area to have a rest and to, I guess, just wait for something to come along and perhaps shoot it, but, you know, that didn't happen. Something else happened, and Bart was killed from some sort of unknown force, you know. The thing that I find really strange, though, is he left his bear spray and, like, his radio at the camp. That doesn't make any sense. It's almost like he grabbed his bow and some arrows and whatever he had next to him at the time and took off, you know. He had some stuff with him, but some very key important items that he should have had on his person were not there, you know. And you're alone in the Yukon. Like, the Yukon is so wild and rugged and there's animals and danger everywhere. You would think that you would have those things close by at all times, especially if you leave your camp. But that's not the case with this story, so it just adds to the mystery. The Yukon, you know, there's lots of Bigfoot reports that come from the Yukon. There's lots of Sasquatch activity in that area. It's northern Canada, forest everywhere. And also the Yukon neighbors the Northwest Territories, which is where we have the Nahanni Valley, the Nahanni River, and, you know, the cases of the Headless Valley. So you have lots of old reports that we've talked about on this channel before of people going out into the wilderness back in the day, old prospectors and people out looking to find fortune, you know, looking for gold. Well, you know how the stories go. People end up finding heads that have washed up on the river shore. And they don't know how these people had died and why just the heads are found. Well, legend has it, there's the cannibal giants of the Nahanni Valley. There's Sasquatch-like beings, giants, you know. And people think that they are responsible. The First Nations people of the area think that they are responsible. So as soon as I heard the story, I immediately thought of, you know, the Nahanni Valley and these stories of the cannibal giants and them attacking people and, you know, taking their heads, basically. It's just a very, very strange story. That being said, though, like, you don't hear of the Friend or the RCMP or anybody finding any actual Bigfoot evidence. Like, they don't mention anything of tracks or anything like that. And, you know, you wonder, like, would they actually, even if they did find it? Probably not. But there are, in fact, a lot of reports that come out of the Yukon. And, for example, we're going to go over one right now. We're going to go over a Bigfoot report that happened back in the early 90s. And it's a very strange one. It starts off normal enough, but by the end of it, when the person telling the story describes what the creature actually looked like, it has a really weird mystical vibe to it, you know, like the creature was there, but maybe not completely. And you'll know what I mean when you hear the story, so let's get into that right now. This incident happened in the summer of 1992 in my hometown of Whitehorse, Yukon, while I was taking a walk with my mother in the woods near her home. At the time, I guess I was about 39 years old and her about 60. This is the first time I've told this story to the public. What prompted me to tell the story is that I see very few Sasquatch stories from the Yukon. Actually, from what I've seen and heard, the Yukon should be considered a hotspot for Sasquatch, or the Bushman as it is known up here. I'm going to tell the story the way it comes out, and here it is. Being a sort of explorer kind of a person, I like to take walks in the woods and off the beaten track, so I have a better chance of finding something rare or interesting. For one, I'm a serious rockhound, and another, I'm a major local history buff, so I'm always off in the woods looking for something. Anyways, one evening I decided to walk down this old road heading west into some pretty dense and very rocky forest. It was a cat road, and it was skinny, and there were tall trees on each side. And the funny thing was, it kept twisting and turning back and forth that at any given time, either forward or backwards, the line of sight was only about maybe 80 feet, I figure. Anyways, I walk and sort of hope to get somewhere. A clearing, an old cabin, or at least a change of terrain, but no such luck. I noticed it was getting close to dark, so I figured I'd better turn around and head back, which was probably about an hour and a half walk. I got back to my mom's just as darkness fell. Just for the record, during the whole time, I didn't get any weird or scared feelings or anticipate anything going to happen. Nor did anything, which in retrospect has an interesting dimension. Point being is, it was extremely silent, almost too silent, and the next morning I tell my mom about the road, and the fact that not far down, there's an old dump where we might find some old bottles. Did she want to go check it out? Sure, she says. It was a beautiful sunny day, not a cloud in the sky, and it was about 20 degrees, a perfect day for a walk, so we went. We get to the dump, which was a very short distance down the road. She checks it out but finds all the bottles broken. She's fine though and enjoying herself, and she's picking flowers. I ask her if she wants to continue down the road a while. She says, "Okay, are you sure there's no bears around?" I said, "I don't think so. I never heard or seen anything last night, and besides, I've been in these woods all my life and I've never had any bear problems. I've seen a few, but they always just took off, and they were all rather small black bears." Anyways, we continued down the road, but just because Mom made me aware of bears, I sort of walked in front of her, about 50 feet or so, and I looked around each corner of the bend in the road, sort of bird-dogging the scene. I guess at about the 4th or 5th bend, I did see something on the rise to the left about 80 feet away, standing and moving slightly from side to side. I stopped in my tracks, and my mom stops in hers, about 50 feet back and out of view. I turn to her and say, "Someone is up ahead." I look again, and there he is. I expect him to approach and say hi or whatever, but it doesn't happen. I look closer. The sun is behind him, and he is in the shade of the trees. I notice that this guy, besides being unusually big and tall, is also wearing black coveralls, and he has a huge mop of hair tapering from the top of his head to the outside of his shoulders. Now I'm standing in the middle of the road, my bright purple t-shirt is glowing almost neon bright in the sunshine. I'm waiting for him to approach, and I'm staring at him trying to see his face, his eyes, and there's nothing. He's still swaying from side to side a bit, but otherwise just standing there. My mom is still about 50 feet back, and she is staying there. She doesn't want to approach any further. She's saying, What is it, Bill?" I say, "I'm not sure." It's now about 2 minutes into this scene, and I'm now starting to feel weird. I'm staring at him, and he is at me, but I can't really see his face. He's in the bloody shadows of the trees. Finally, after I figure about 3 minutes of this stare down, I start to face reality, but I don't want to. That's the only way I can explain my feelings. As soon as I realized what I was having this stare down with, I got pretty excited. The first thing that came to my mind was that I didn't want my mom to see it, or it her. I wanted to defuse the situation with no screaming, no jumping, no fainting, no running. I was thinking of approaching it, but something told me not to, and anyways, it started to approach me. In a split second, I turned on my heel and told my mom, "Let's go." I still never told her what I saw, and I didn't have to. By looking at me, she knew. We walked at a quick pace, but I refused to run. I looked back at every corner, and at about the 3rd corner, there he was, about 20 feet behind. As soon as I saw him, he was gone in the woods, absolutely silent, not a sound, and he was huge. 2 silent strides, and he was gone. This final close encounter lasted, I figure, about 1 second at most. So fast that your mind doesn't even want to remember. But I did, and one thing for sure is that I was relieved that he was gone and going in another direction. After that, we finally came out to the main road. We went across and sat on a log in the woods on the other side. We took out a sandwich, and that's when I said, "Do you know what I saw?" She says, "No." I say, "A Sasquatch. I saw a Sasquatch." She says, "Are you sure?" I say, "Yes, ma'am. I remember some people talking about it. Apparently it visits the village all the time at night and rummages around in the yards." We went home, and I drew a picture of it and ran it through my mind over and over again to try and keep it in my memory. That was 14 years ago, and I can still remember it very well. Like I said, it was extremely quiet. I don't recall hearing birds or squirrels or anything like that. When we walked, it seemed that he was levitating or something, like he wasn't touching the ground, but a few inches above. He also seemed to have no definition, outside of a silhouette, just like a shadow. I don't know if he had hair or fur, as I didn't bother to go up and touch him. The really weird thing of it is his pointy head configuration. It was very pronounced. When I was watching him, I thought of Saturday Night Live's Coneheads, but I surely wasn't laughing. Also, at the time of the incident, my adrenaline was the highest it has ever been my whole life. I was looking for a stick or a club, but couldn't find one, which angered me, and I was ready to take him on if need be, though I don't figure I had much of a chance. Like I said, other people have seen or heard him near the village, which is about 2 miles away. I figure I bumped into him on his way there. I've talked to a few native people, and our descriptions are uncannily similar. Now I believe in Bushman, and I think we should leave him and his kind at peace. Very interesting report. And like I said before I played that segment there, the creature is described as almost floating, you know, not really even touching the ground, and it just moves so quietly and stealthily, almost as if it was a ghost or something along those lines. Just a black silhouette. There are a lot of Sasquatch reports where you hear it described in that sense. And also another thing that matches up with lots of other reports is the description of the Bigfoot swaying back and forth. I don't know what that is or why it does that. Maybe it's trying to like replicate a bush or something blowing in the breeze or something along those lines. Maybe it's something it's trying to mimic like that to try and keep itself concealed. You know, maybe you won't notice it if it acts like a bush. I have no idea. It's just one of those things that you will read about. The Sasquatch kind of going back and forth like that. Weird, but you know, it's one of those things. You don't hear this guy say anything about the strange smell, but you know, that's kind of one of those things that turns up sometimes and not in every report. Maybe about like 50% of them you hear that strange, off-putting smell described. But a very interesting story nonetheless. Happened in the Yukon, and I'm sure there's thousands of other, you know, examples of encounters like this that have happened that were never documented, especially over the course of like, you know, the centuries that have gone by, you know, since people have been up there. All the stories of the, you know, cannibal giants and the Sasquatch in the Nahanni River Valley in the Northwest Territories, those stories are hundreds and hundreds of years old. Like that kind of stuff has been going on since man has been there, essentially, which is interesting. I mean, when you think of like Alaska, Northwest Territories, the Yukon, if a creature did cross the Bering Land Bridge way back in the day, you know, those would have been the first lands that it populated, you know, along with people. So just an interesting thing to think about. There's lots of evidence of early human existence up there, you know, lots of petroglyphs and caves and writings like on the stone and stuff like that. Like there are lots of archaeological finds have been discovered in the Yukon. I think one of the most significant ones was the Bluefish Cave. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's what it was called. I think they found evidence of that cave being used as a shelter. I think they found actual remains of people. So lots of strange history up there. The north is just littered with mysteries. So when you hear a story about a guy like Bart SCHLEYER, an expert hunter, you know, a scientist, a biologist, a very smart guy, a very talented guy, a guy that was well respected in his community, not just in his community, but among the scientific community and among the hunting community. And, you know, you feel like he would have been on top of anything. If something was going on around him that didn't seem right, you know, I'm sure he would have sensed something like that, especially if it was a bear, because bears were his specialty. That was his thing, was researching bears. He knew everything about bear behavior. He had so much experience tagging these things and putting collars on them and you know, like actual hands-on experience. What do you guys think? You know, it just doesn't add up to me. It does seem like something a little bit creepier happened. Maybe the whole time he was there, which was a day or two, something was watching him. When you get dropped off by a float plane, that makes a lot of noise. So if there was something intelligent in the area, it would have been able to detect, you know, his arrival, basically. It would have been able to hear the plane come in, and it would know, that's where I gotta go to find this guy. And the reason for, you know, a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot doing something like that is a mystery. It's something we don't know, you know, if it in fact was a Bigfoot. It's just one of those things, you know, every now and then you hear like really gruesome, horrific stories like this, and they're very, very rare. But it's like, what is going on? Even like just, it's terrifying, you know, if you go out in the woods by yourself, even just thinking of a bear coming into your camp and trying to get you while you're in your tent, that is just a nightmare to think about, you know. But very weird how nothing in the camp was really bothered. Everything was left alone and it wasn't disturbed, which doesn't add up to a bear. You know, bears don't behave like that. They will go for the food and they will take all the food. That's just what they do. So anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments section. If you haven't subscribed to Mountain Beast Mysteries, hit the subscribe button. If you don't have the notifications turn on the notifications. I appreciate you guys watching this video. We'll see you next time on Mountain Beast Mysteries.